The secret the chosen never confess. At night, when silence wrapped the world like a thick veil, Father Mateo would sit alone in the chapel's dim glow, his eyes tracing the candlelight that trembled as if unsure of its place. To his flock, he was the image of unwavering faith. But within him echoed an ache, a memory not of sin committed, but of desire strangled in silence. The confessional booth knew the secrets of others, never his. He feared the weakness still lingering beneath his cassock, an old yearning wrapped in pious robes. The smell of incense always stirred something, reminding him of late nights in seminary, moments when the sacred and the carnal nearly kissed. He had buried that longing in prayer, in fasting, in years of service. But still it moved. Not loud, not visible, just a pulse, a breath, a shadow that refused to vanish. He guided souls with scripture and soothed pain with psalms. But when the church emptied, and only the saints carved in wood remained, Mateo felt a coldness he never voiced. The silence was not peace, it was restraint. He avoided mirrors, not out of vanity, but because sometimes in his own eyes, he saw the boy he once was, wild with questions and hungry for truth not found in doctrine. That boy had loved deeply once, not in secret, but in sinless purity that the world, and the church, refused to name holy. The past had been stripped of words but not of color. And sometimes, during benedictions, he'd catch himself blessing others while silently begging God for that memory to die completely. It never did. It waited, kind and cruel, beneath his sermons. The arrival of Elias, a theology student with eyes full of fire, and wounds he tried to hide, disturbed Mateo's delicate balance. Elias reminded him of the boy he had once been, curious, wounded, burning for belonging. Mateo watched from a distance, then too closely. He found excuses to engage, to mentor, to guide. But beneath the pious intentions, something ancient stirred, unwanted, unwelcomed, but alive. Elias spoke of grace, but his presence brought unrest. It wasn't lust, not as the world understands. It was a longing to protect, to see, to be seen. A desire not condemned in words, but never sanctified by scripture. Mateo prayed harder, fasted longer. But the more he resisted, the clearer Elias became. Not as temptation, but as mirror. One rainy afternoon, Elias collapsed at the altar, shaking under the weight of an invisible burden. Mateo rushed to him, held him, whispered prayers into his ear, as if they were spells meant to cast out shame. Elias clung to him, trembling, not out of fear, but from release. He had confessed nothing, but Mateo heard everything. He knew the tears. He recognized the silence between words. It was his own. That moment shattered a wall inside him. Not into sin, but into humanity. No act followed. No boundary crossed. But a truth settled in Mateo's chest like sacred ash. He had spent decades fleeing from what God never asked him to fear. Love, not desire, not defiance, just love, was never the enemy. Mateo didn't speak of that moment again. Not to Elias. Not to anyone. But something changed. His homilies softened. His confessions lengthened. He no longer preached with certainty, but with compassion. The people noticed. They said he was holier, more understanding. They didn't know he had finally met himself at the altar. The secret he never confessed had lost its power, not because it was destroyed, but because it was no longer hidden. Grace had met truth in the quiet of that sacred space, and both had survived. That was his miracle. Not perfection, not denial, but integration. A life no longer fractured by fear, but shaped by mercy. Years later, when Elias became a priest, he returned to visit Mateo, now frail but glowing with peace. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't need to. Elias knelt, kissed Mateo's hand, and whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Mateo smiled weakly, not because he had saved anyone, but because in Elias' journey, he had found his own redemption. The chapel remained quiet, bathed in golden light. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, two men shared a sacred silence. A silence full of truth. The kind the chosen rarely confess. But sometimes, if they're brave enough, they live it instead.